All right, our next presenter is going to present on water temperature in the Klamath-Trinity Basin, flow, other key drivers, and climate change impacts. His name's Eli Asarian. He's an aquatic ecologist and hydrologist and founder of the Eureka-based consulting firm Riverbend Sciences. He has worked in California and Oregon watersheds for over 20 years. He specializes in statistical analysis of large, complex data sets and has authored or co-authored over 25 technical analyses on flow, water temperature, water quality, and algae. Since 2015, he has completed 7 water temperature studies in the Klamath-Trinity River Basin, including wildfire smoke, cools, summer river, and stream water temperatures, and the TRRP-funded Synthesizing 87 Years of Scientific Inquiry into Trinity River Water Temperatures, which I was lucky enough to work with him on. He has assisted with the development and implementation of salmon and steelhead recovery plans throughout California and serves as the president of the Salmonid Restoration Federation. Please welcome Eli Asarian.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you today. As Kyle said, I'm going to be talking about water temperatures and share with you what I've learned about water temperatures working in the Klamath Basin and the Trinity on this temperature stuff for about the past 10 years or so. So let's get started. So my hope is that through developing a better understanding of water temperatures and thermal regimes, that'll give us the information that we need to give us the opportunity to make better management decisions, and for that to lead to better restoration outcomes. Because I do think, water temperature is a very powerful driver of all things aquatic biology, and I think there's room for improvement. I'm going to start with just a very brief background on stream temperatures. Then I'll share with you some of the key findings of research across the Klamath Basin, and then we'll spend a lot of time focused on the Trinity. So first, some brief background on stream temperature and physics. So the temperature at any point in a river system is determined by its heat budget, and that's composed of the energy fluxes. So that's the exchange of energy between the stream and the atmosphere, and the stream and the stream bed. So a big one of those is solar radiation coming in from the sun. Also, long wave radiation being exchanged between the water and nearby stream banks or vegetation. And then we also have the advective fluxes. That's a movement of water. So that's water flowing into a reach, exiting the reach, tributaries coming in, the exchange of water between the stream and the groundwater, or the stream and the hyporheic zone. So every site in the river system is going to have its own, and at every point in time is going to have its own unique temperature based on the net sum of all these processes. However, while it does change in time and space, there are some sort of general principles about which components of the heat budget are most important in different places. So in our western forested mountains, our general sort of ecoregion here, the small streams are generally well shaded. There's not a lot of solar radiation, and so what dominates there is the advective fluxes, so the input of groundwater, input of tributaries, as well as the long wave radiation exchange. Then as you move downstream into the larger rivers, the channel widens up. There's more sun striking the water, and so then solar radiation comes to dominate the heat budgets there. So let's keep those general principles in mind while we explore all this temperature data. So I've worked on a series of about 8 studies of temperatures across the Klamath Basin. I realized I gave Kyle the wrong number. I said 7. With a great group of co-authors from tribes and federal agencies and state agencies and other consultants. So I wanted to give credit to all my co-authors. There's a team effort on this stuff. So let's get into here's a map of the Klamath. Luckily, there was a little bit of introduction about the Klamath yesterday. Obviously, the Trinity is the Klamath's largest tributary. Some of the fish species that we're concerned about is the coho salmon, steelhead trout, Chinook salmon, including the spring run. And I wanted to put a little aerial showing just to make sure you all know where the Salmon River is. It's over the hill to the north from here. And there's a spring run. That's the center of the wild spring run population in the Klamath Basin. There's no hatchery influence there in the salmon. And so I'll be talking a good amount about the salmon in the Salmon River today. Our approach in these projects is a very data-heavy approach. Luckily, there's a lot of water temperature data out there. You know, you just get a little sensor, stick it out in the river or in the stream for a few months or a year, collect that, download the data. There's tons of water temperature data out there, right? It's literally hundreds and hundreds of sites within the Klamath Basin. And that's collected by local nonprofit organizations, federal agencies, tribes, state agencies, universities. So we tried to, for these projects, we tried to just compile as much data as we possibly could. And then, so I wanted to give thanks to all the people who have collected all this data, because I literally collected none of this data myself. I'm relying on all, because there's probably, you know, hundreds of people that have contributed to the collection of all this data. And so every day, every year, every site is its own sort of natural experiment. And we accumulate and compile these huge data sets. You can really, and then you analyze them in interesting ways. You can really learn some lessons about what's happening with temperature. So as I said, I've done led 8 studies across the basin. And some of them were focused on particular subbasins, whereas others are focused on a particular topic, like the effects of flow or the effects of wildfire smoke. And I've listed Trinity here, but I'm going to save the Trinity results for a little bit later in the talk. So the temperature response to climate variability and climate change is going to vary according to where we are within the stream network, what the characteristics of that site are, and what time of year are we in. And we're seeing we'll see different responses to a heat wave, say, or to wildfire smoke in a river that has that large open to solar radiation than we'll see in a small well-shaded stream. So the first project I'll talk about is this analysis of temperatures in the Klamath River and its tributaries from around the Oregon border out to the mouth of the river, and including all the tributaries except for the Trinity. So we had about 85 sites, and we looked at a 22-year period that ended in 2017. And we analyzed the data on a monthly basis using linear mixed effects models. And so this plot here shows the coefficients for these different predictor variables that we included in the models. So that's air temperature, wildfire smoke, snowpack, and river flow for 3 months out of the year. So anything that's on the left side of the graph is something that is correlated with cooler temperatures, and something on the right side of the dotted line means it's correlated with warmer temperatures. And so some of these factors, like air temperature, has a relatively even effect in each of these 3 months. Whereas other, like wildfire smoke, has a more powerful effect in the month of August. And flow has its most powerful effect in the month of July. So different factors are more important at different times of year. We also look at long-term trends, and the factor or the thing that popped out the most from that is that temperatures in July are increasing faster than either August or September, or than the annual maximums. They're increasing at about 0.6 degrees Celsius per decade over this time period. So we're going to drill into that more, and I'll explain to you why that might be. So this slope here that's shown is for the overall 85 sites together. Now we'll look at those slopes for each of the 85 different sites. So the y-axis is the same as the last graph. It's the change in temperature over the 22-year study period. The x-axis is the cooling effect, the magnitude of the cooling effect of flow. So something that would be in the upper left quadrant of that graph is a site whose temperatures have increased rapidly, and a site that is cool in a high flow year and warm in a low flow year. So it's how strongly does flow affect temperature. So you see there's a lot of scatter here, but there is somewhat of a relationship, right, where the streams that are warming the fastest are those that are most affected by flow. And a lot of these are located in the Salmon River, and they're the core holding habitat for the wild adult spring run Chinook. So now we'll look at two sites here. We'll drill into specifics and sort of see the opposite ends of the high and low sensitivity to flow. So the South Fork of the Salmon River, upstream of Black Bear, is shown in the red line there for the annual maximum temperature. And in a high flow year like 2011, its temperatures are 7 degrees Celsius colder than in a low flow drought year like 2014. It's like a totally different thermal regime, right, in terms of what type of organisms will be happy in that type of environment. We can compare that with the Little North Fork of the Salmon River, where there's only about a 2.5 degree difference between a high flow year and a drought year. So temperatures there are much less sensitive to flow, and temperatures in the Little North Fork are increased much more slowly over the study period than they did in the South Fork that was more sensitive to flow. Another trend pattern that came out really strong in the data is the rise of wildfire smoke. And it particularly is strong in the month of August. That's when we really get a lot of smoke, and when the smoke can really cool things down. And that smoke essentially acts like a cloud, and it reflects the solar radiation and sends it back into the atmosphere. That means there's less solar directly warming the water, and it means that there is it also cools down the air temperature. And so the two of those things together cool down the water and make it easier for fish to get through that long, hot summer. And, while we tend to think of wildfire smoke as being a somewhat natural phenomenon, people do have some management control over smoke, right? So for example, the Karuk tribe in their climate adaptation plan has advocated for the use of fire during droughts to generate smoke to cool down the river. It's a question of your priorities, right? Yep, spring Chinook is at the center of your culture, and the spring Chinook might go extinct if you don't do anything about it. The smoke is one potential way to manage that. Obviously, there's impacts to air quality and other things. We got to manage this in a holistic context, but I just want to point out it is an option. We found that the magnitude of smoke-induced cooling depends on the characteristics of the watershed. There's a relationship between watershed area and the amount of smoke cooling. So in a larger river like the Salmon River that has all that solar exposure, shading from smoke there really has dramatic cooling effects. If you look at a very small, very well shaded tributary, it's already shaded from the protected from the sun by the riparian canopy and the canyon topography. So extra shading from smoke doesn't have as big of an effect as it does in the salmon. And then you have streams that are mid-sized, right, that have some solar exposure and some canopy, and there you see an intermediate effect of smoke. So what about flow? Where and when does it have its strongest effects on temperatures? So I developed a technique to model daily stream temperatures using a generalized additive model that predicts daily temperatures as a function of day of the year, air temperature, flow, and then an interaction between flow and day, so that the slope of the relationship between flow and water temperature can vary seasonally, because at sometimes a year flow is really important, other times it's not, and also incorporates an autocorrelation term. These models work really well. The average error is about 1 degree Celsius. Here's an example for one site in the Klamath Basin, the Scott River. Here's about a 20-year time series of flow data, so we can fit a smoother across the higher flows and the lower flows, and then that gives us inputs that we can put into our calibrated water temperature model, our statistical model, and we can predict, well, what water temperatures would we expect under these flow scenarios. So the low flow scenario is in red, high flow scenario is in blue, and then the black is the difference between the two. And interestingly, the strongest effects occurs on June 15th, which is happens to be my birthday. So I guess I was meant to study this stuff. And that's why I'm so interested in it, right? So the effect of flow is not uniform across the year, right? It has this huge effect in mid-June and really, April through July and somewhat into August, but almost no effect in September. So now let's take this black line of that temperature difference between the scenarios for Scott River, and we'll look at that in the context of 9 additional sites. So Scott River is now in purple. It has that one at the top of the graph there, and showing it in the context of a few other sites like Rush Creek, Indian Creek, Shasta River, other sites. So you see that the magnitude of that cooling from flow varies from site to site, but the general seasonal pattern is very similar. So that's 10 sites, but I was curious about additional sites. I was looking around in the literature to see who else had done this kind of work, and I couldn't find much on a daily basis, but I did find on a monthly basis some previous projects, and they didn't have the kind of graphics or summaries that I wanted, so I contacted the study authors and then was able to compile this data together and make these plots. So from Dan Isaac, they studied about 20 or 200 sites across the western United States, and they used monthly multiple regression models to predict water temperature as a function of air temperature and flow. And the results are similar to what I showed in that last slide. It's really that April through July or into August period when flow has its strongest cooling effects. And similarly, I got this data from Elisa Fitzgerald at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. They use spatial stream network models all over the Pacific coast to model stream temperatures, and it shows the same thing of that April through July or August period for the strongest effects of flow. So in another project, we use spatial stream network models to model water temperatures for the month of August in the Salmon River. And so we developed a current conditions baseline for recent decades, and then we made projections for a future climate change scenario that's a high emissions, fairly extreme scenario. And you'll see that temperatures are much warmer in the future climate scenario than they are under present. But that warming is not evenly distributed across the landscapes. There's not nearly as much warming in the small headwater tributaries, and then there's much greater warming in the main stems, in particular in the South Fork of the Salmon. And interestingly, since we finished this work several years ago, we had a series of fairly intense drought years, and the South Fork of the Salmon really has warmed up in that time, and it's actually led to a behavior change in the spring Chinook. Whereas the spring Chinook used to primarily go into the South Fork, they have now primarily shifted up into the North Fork, perhaps as a result of those increasing temperatures in the South Fork. It's important to point out that climate change is not a yes or no type of thing, right? It really matters how far down the road we go. And if we can, as a global society, get emissions under control, that's going to really help limit the amount that our streams are going to warm. Every 1/10 of a degree is going to help. So conclusions for these Klamath Basin studies: the response of sites to climate variability and climate change depends on the time of year and the characteristics of the site. The effect of wildfire smoke is greatest in those large streams and rivers that are open to the sun. The effect of flow is greatest in April through July. For long-term trends, we're seeing the most rapid increases in the month of July, not seeing those same rapid increases in August. And I think that's really a function of two things. One, flow is not as important in August. And then two, we've had all the smoke that's really been cooling down August. Rising air temperatures are pushing up water temperatures everywhere, but the places that are really warming the fastest are those that are powerfully linked to river flow. And since we've been in a lot of drought years, a lot of low flow years, that's where temperatures have been rising the fastest in those sites. As climate change progresses, the cold water is contracting upstream into the into the headwaters. And so we need to be able to provide fish with passage into those areas. That's part of the reason why the dam removals on the Klamath are so important, is because there's several sites in the upper basin that have hundreds of cubic feet per second of cold spring water that's going to remain cold for millennia, no matter what happens with climate change. The thermal refugia at the mouths of tributaries are going to become increasingly important, as those small creeks they're colder than the main stems now, and they're not going to warm as much as the main stems are going to warm. So we should develop strategies to protect and enhance those cold water sources and the habitat at the mouths. All these 8 studies are available on my website, and the Symposium program has a link to my website if anyone wants to read those, or of course I'm happy to talk with you all about that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Trinity. So I was the lead author on the Trinity River temperature synthesis report. Other co-authors were Kyle DiGiulio and Dave Guyman from the Yurok tribe, Seth Naiman from NOAA Fisheries, and Todd Buxton from Reclamation. So I wanted to thank them for all their work on the project and acknowledge their contributions. I think we made a good team. I did a lot of the data crunching, but they had all the background knowledge of how the Trinity system works and were able to explain it to me and suggest analyses to do. And also wanted to thank Andreas Kraus, who helped get this project going before he left to his new job. So our objectives for the project were to compile all the water temperature data that we could get our hands on. There's massive amounts of data that were out there, but it was kind of scattered around. And some of these data sets, I think if we had not compiled them for this project, probably would have been lost. There was literally only, there were two really important data sets that only existed on the private personal computers of people who had, moved to new jobs, and their agencies had essentially lost the data. So we compiled, I think, 13 million temperature records, and we have a really comprehensive references list. I forgot to look it up, but I think we have somewhere on the order of 15 pages of references for this project. We did a lot of analyses evaluating things like the linkages between flow and temperature in time and space. We looked at temperature effects on biological objectives, and then also looked at the regulatory objective to see if the temperature criteria were being met. We developed updated conceptual models, and we provided management recommendations. I developed this not to scale sort of amateur cartoonish version of the Trinity River, and I'm going to use this as a template to summarize the primary findings of our study, and then we'll circle back and look at a number of these in more detail. So the Trinity River is the elephant, or the Trinity Reservoir is the elephant at the top of the system, right? It's this big reservoir, it regulates flow. It thermally stratifies, and it's got this cold water pool in the bottom, and water can only be released from deep in the reservoir or really deep in the reservoir. There's no surface water release. So the releases they're almost always cold, except when during severe droughts, when the reservoir really gets drawn down to low levels, then that cold water pool can become depleted and warm up. From there, the water goes into Lewiston Reservoir, and during the summer, it warms through the reservoir. And the amount of warming that happens in Lewiston is really a function of how much water is being slugged through that reservoir. It's a function of the combined sum of the river flows and the diversion flows. And since the record of decision and the increases in the spring river releases, there really has been a pretty substantial increase in the flow rates through Lewiston in the spring, and that has limited the warming that occurs in Lewiston. There was also a thermal curtain put in that's helped some. So the Lewiston is not as big of an issue as it was in past decades. Still can be important. The river from Lewiston to Douglas City, there's that 450 cubic feet per second summer base flow, and that provides holding habitat for the adult spring run Chinook that previously held in stratified pools that are now inaccessible above the dam. And Todd's going to talk more this afternoon about stratified pools. The next reach down from Douglas City to the North Fork, that reach, the temperatures are really strongly dependent on the quantity of flow being released from the dam. If there's high flow releases, it's very cold through the entire reach. If it's lower releases, it'll warm up sooner. And under our current the rod-driven flow regime with those really high releases in the springtime, temperatures are so cold in this upper reach here that they're below the optimal range for juvenile growth. Basically, until the fish have already left, then temperatures can warm up some. But that high flow release has led to really cold water in that reach. In the lower Trinity River, down near Wichipec and below the South Fork, the effects of the dam releases are really on temperatures are really variable. During the high spring flow releases, they do have a big cooling effect, and in fact, they can be up to 3 degrees. We predicted they can be up to 3 degrees Celsius colder than the pre-dam unimpaired flows. Once things settle down to summer base flow, there really is not a lot of cooling from the dam releases, the bottom part of the river. The 450 CFS is not enough to get cold water all the way down into the bottom of the river. The transit time is just too slow. The Klamath and Trinity rivers at the confluence generally have pretty similar temperatures, except for times when there's really a lot of water being released from Lewiston. Those releases that might happen in August or September. During those big releases, the Trinity can be quite a bit colder than the Klamath, but in general, they have pretty similar temperatures because they're exposed to a lot of the same, radiative forcings and climate. The snowpack in the mountains governs the timing and the magnitude of flow into the spring in most of the tributaries. And as climate change progresses, we're seeing a shift away from snow and towards rain and earlier runoff. The unregulated tributaries that don't have dams on them, the largest of those have thermal regimes that are pretty similar to the pre-dam river. There's a natural warming cycle that happens from the spring into summer, where as days get longer and the flows recede, the rivers or the creeks warm up, and those larger tributaries can get pretty hot in the summertime, similar to what the pre-dam river was like. The smaller tributaries, don't warm up as much. Because the dam releases are so cold, in the summertime, most of the tributaries in the upper Trinity are actually warmer than the main stem. Once you get down to the lowest section of the river, like on the Hoopa Reservation, the small tributaries do provide a thermal refugia because the main stem has warmed up in the summer and fall, and those cold water refugia can be important for, say, adult Chinook coming back. Due to the impacts of the mining and the dam construction, there's been a loss of habitat complexity along the main stem corridor, and so that's one of the benefits of the channel rehabilitation projects is the potential to provide thermal diversity and lots of different ranges of temperatures in off-channel ponds and edge habitats that can increase the thermal diversity in the river. So organisms are not forced to all live in the same temperature. Okay, so that was the whirlwind tour of the results, and then we'll circle into these things in more detail. One of the major accomplishments of this project was to develop daily predictions for unimpaired temperatures at Lewiston. So we did this at a daily time step using a generalized additive model with almost an identical structure to the one that I mentioned a few minutes ago that we've applied around the Klamath. There was a 6-year period where we had pre-dam data to calibrate this model, including a few years that I found in a report that had not previously been digitized. They were not used, like, say, in the flow study. So we had that 6-year period, calibrated the model. Model appears to be, really accurate to within about 1 degree Celsius average error. The one caveat is that we do not have any critically dry or extremely wet years. We have a range, but not the extremes. So when we're extrapolating out, there's a little bit of extra uncertainty there on those extreme water year types. So once we had the calibrated model, then we generated unimpaired temperature and flow record from 1963 to 2019. And then that's at Lewiston, that statistical model. And then we fed that into the RBM10 temperature simulation model that the program uses to evaluate flow regimes. And so we were able to route that downstream and come up with predictions of unimpaired temperatures and flows all the way down out to the mouth of the river. So the most dramatic thermal impacts from the dam are, as you would expect, right at where the dam is, so right below the dam. So the top plot there shows our no dam unimpaired scenario for Lewiston, the no dam scenario, and you'll see there that there's a big range of temperatures between the winter and the summer. The maximums occur in late July, early August. And there's a range, whereas in high flow years, the temperatures stay a little cooler, and in low flow years they get somewhat hotter. Once the dam goes in, that's the temperatures in the middle plot there. That variation from winter to summer is very compressed, and there's also compressed the difference between water year types. Temperatures are pretty much similar in every year. The bottom plot there shows the difference between the with dam and without dam temperatures. And so here the dam makes the river several degrees warmer in the winter and then a lot colder in the summer, over 10 degrees. So we divided the period of record up into eras. We had a pre-dam era that ended when the dam started filling in 1961. We had a full diversion era from 63 to 78. Once the base flow, summer base flow, was increased from 150 to 300, we started what we called the transitional era, and that ran through 1999. And so it does include an increase in summer base flow to 450 in the middle of that area. We started the rod era in 2000. It was somewhat of an arbitrary decision. Obviously that's not legally when the rod era started, but when I was looking at the hydrographs, I really had a hard time seeing that there was some magic difference that happened, in 2004, 2005. So I just broke it out at the millennia there. But I acknowledge that it could have been moved a few years one direction or the other. But I felt those early 2000s, to me, when I looked at the hydrographs, were more similar to the later years than to the earlier years. So, on the far right there is the unimpaired flow scenario for the whole dammed period of record. So you see that the unimpaired flow scenario and the pre-dam era have very similar temperatures and flows, and then yeah. Okay, so here's a comparison of how flow is distributed across the month of the year between the different eras. There is in the pre-dam era, there was no diversion, so all the water was going down the river, and really most of the water was happening between January and June, or December, I guess, also. Then we had the full diversion era, where 90% of the flow was sent through the diversion over the valley and very little river flows. And in the transitional era, there was starting to be some more flow releases. And then in the rod era, we have maintained the, similar to pre-dam levels in May, and high flows in the spring, and high flows. There's higher than natural flows in the summertime, but there's very little flow happening in the wintertime. So there's really an emphasis on spring and summer. These are measured temperatures for the columns are different eras, and the rows are different sites, and it's a daily maximum, mean, and minimum temperatures. So one of the interesting features of the rod flows, these high spring releases, is you'll notice in the pre-dam era, right, and I've talked about several times, there's this natural warming trend of we get into the springtime and temperatures climb. In the rod era, temperatures start to climb, and then high flows happen, and then the temperatures dive back down. There's this sort of weird kink in the seasonal pattern, and that occurs at Lewiston, Douglas City, Pear Tree above the North Fork. I'll keep the graph here the same, but just zoom out so we can see a few additional sites. And so you can still, that kink is still apparent at Burnt Ranch, and then it's gone by Hoopa and Wichipeg. So it doesn't propagate all the way down the system. But that's kind of a weird thing to be doing to a fish, right? The fish are expecting things are going to get warmer, and then all of a sudden it's getting colder, and may change their timing of out migration, things like that. Here's some more measured temperatures. These are 7-day average temperatures, again with the eras as columns and the sites as rows. The gray shaded area there is the juvenile salmonid growth target of 13 to 16.5 degrees Celsius that the program has adopted for the river at the North Fork confluence. But biologically that target can be applied anywhere. So that's what we've done here in this graph. And so some things to point out here is that there's better temperatures for salmonid growth in the transitional era than what we've had in the rod era, because there's so much water being released at these very cold releases. So and especially like say in the month of June, if we look at the normal, the wet and the extremely wet years in the transitional era, about half the time temperatures are in the optimal range for salmonid growth. In the rod era, that's down to about 9%. And see similar but a little bit less extreme patterns at Pear Tree, the next site downstream, and then even less of that pattern at Wichipeg. So it does diminish somewhat with distance from the dam. We conducted biological modeling to see how organisms might respond to these temperatures. We used the no dam unimpaired flow scenario as our baseline to compare the other scenarios, to compare other flow scenarios to. So we used the RBM10 model for temperature, and then we took those temperatures and fed them into spreadsheet models for growth and development. So this plot on the right here shows for the different water year types, the 5 water year types. Under the no dam unimpaired flow scenario, it shows the temperatures, the salmonid growth rates, the metamorphosis time for foothill yellow-legged frogs, and generation times for chironomid midges and baited mayflies. So the colder temperatures in those high flow water year types reduce the growth rate of salmonids, slows down the generation time for invertebrates, and it slows down the metamorphosis time for the frogs. So this graph here is of the unimpaired flow scenario, and now I'll show you the comparisons that we did between the unimpaired flow scenario and a range of with dam flows from 300 CFS up to 4,000. I'm just going to show graphs here for the normal water year type, but we did the same analysis for each of the 5 water year types. So in the temperatures and these, this is kind of a spatial average of the entire river, all reaches averaged together. I think in the report we have got some more details, but here I'm just presenting it at the river-wide level. So in February and March, it doesn't really matter for temperature purposes how much water is released from the dam. It's the river temperatures are going to be warmer, no matter if you're releasing a little water or a lot of water. But as you get later into the year, like in May, if there's a low flow release, you'll have temperatures that are warmer than the unimpaired. Or if you have higher flows, like you're releasing 4,000, they'll be much colder than the unimpaired. And you get into June, it's just a question of how much colder is the river. The more water you release, the more cold you get beyond the unimpaired scenario. Similarly for salmonid growth in that May and June, there's big effects on salmonid growth rates with those high flows, where the high flows are slowing down growth. Similar results for the generation times for the mayflies and the midges and the metamorphosis time for the yellow-legged frogs, where these high flow releases are slowing those organisms down and driving down their development rates. In the report, we discussed the concept of lateral thermal thermal diversity. Here's a figure here that is from a review paper by Ashley Steele. This is not the Trinity, it's just sort of a hypothetical river, showing the different temperature regimes that can be present within, you know, relatively short reach. You got the main channel of the river, then you have a side channel, and the side channel, you know, is fed by the main stem, so it has pretty much the same temperatures as the main stem. A hyporheic flow channel where the water is coming from the river, it's going subsurface into the gravel, and then that's popping up in this hyporheic fed channel from the gravels. Temperatures there are sort of more muted compared to the main stem river, and shifted somewhat in time depending on how long that flow path is. Then in the groundwater channel, where we got groundwater coming into a channel, maybe coming off the hill slope, there, you know, temperature is just very flatline and kind of compressed. And so if we could get back to a place where the river had all these different kinds of habitats at the same, you know, point in time, we'd have multiple different temperatures available, and fish and other organisms that can move could seek out where they want to be, and they could move, you know, every hour, every day, or every week to try to find the places that they want to be. Floodplain ponds and off-channel habitats, floodplain ponds are not really shown in this figure, but you know, that would be an additional habitat type with different temperatures. So there's a really, you know, different habitat in the main stem river in the primary channel compared to the floodplain habitats. The floodplain habitats tend to be shallower, lower velocity. Water can really slow down and spend some time there and absorb energy and grow food, compared to the primary channel is, you know, much higher velocity. There can also be a lot of food on the floodplain, right? So there's a photo from a study in the Central Valley showing there was 150 times more food, you know, in a volume of water on the floodplain compared to the river. So this thermal diversity can be incorporated into the channel rehabilitation projects. So we use the SRH-2D modeling at the Oregon Gulch Restoration Site, and so the left panels are the pre-project, and then the right panel is the after the project was constructed, or, you know, a model of what it would be like. For two different time steps, the top is early morning, and then the bottom panels are sort of late morning. And so the pre-project, the entire river is the same temperature, right? But with all the shallow water habitat that is created by the channel rehabilitation, you start to see different temperatures emerging, right? You've got little pockets of much warmer water, and that'll give organisms the opportunity to go where they want to go. And so we proposed in the report that thermal diversity should be used as one of the evaluation metrics when different restoration designs are being evaluated. That thermal diversity is important, and it can be improved through these habitat restoration projects. So the Oregon Gulch, you know, just shows that there is a lot of shallow, low velocity habitat. Here's what the project looked like after construction. It's pretty awesome. I haven't seen it in person, but it looks really nice. And it looks much better than, you know, what happened before the project as a result of all the mining, where the river was really channelized. We spent quite a bit of time in the report talking about Trinity Reservoir. The reservoir strongly stratifies. These are depth profiles from the Bureau of Reclamation. There is warm water in the reservoirs in the spring, but there's just no infrastructure to release that warm water into the river. So we're locked in with having, if we want to have high flows in the spring, they're going to be cold. There's no temperature control device. Trinity storage has gone up and down, you know, over time. It can really be drawn down during droughts. These plots here show the temperatures in Trinity Reservoir at the main outlet and then at the deeper auxiliary outlet. And a few things to point out here. One is that in the 70s and 80s, temperatures were about 1 degree colder than they are in recent decades, even in the very deepest part of the reservoir. So the reservoir is warming, and then also temperatures are become elevated during drought years. So 2014, 2015, and then 1977, the water got so low they couldn't even continue doing depth profiles. I don't think they could launch their boat after June. So it's really that fall period when the reservoir gets drawn down low that temperatures warm up. This can be a big problem for survival of eggs. Coho salmon in particular are really vulnerable to really sensitive to water over about 12 degrees Celsius. And that's what happened at Lewiston in 2021 when the reservoir got down to about 700,000 acre feet. Temperatures peaked in early November at greater than 12 degrees Celsius. And as a result, they saw dramatic declines in egg survival in the hatchery, which I don't think this had been seen before. With climate change, we're predicted to see dramatic decreases in snowpack. So I think that's pretty well understood by people, right? The warmer the climate gets, the less snow we're going to have, the more rain we're going to have. There's going to be changes in runoff timing. I don't think that people have really realized how big a deal this is going to be for reservoir management. When it rains, the water essentially runs off all at once. It's not like accumulating for months and months. You can go out there and you can plan, okay, this is how much runoff we're going to get this year. With the rain, it's like it happens and you have to be ready for it before it happens, because we can't have a situation where Trinity Reservoir is getting overtopped. That would just be catastrophic failure, right? So there's going to need to maintain a bigger flood control buffer in the top of the reservoir. On average, that's going to lead to lower storage going into the summer, which is going to increase the chance of depleting that cold water pool. And modeling that the Department of Water Resources and Reclamation did in 2016 showed that, yes, on average, they're predicting lower reservoir storage with climate change. And I'll point out that, this issue of the runoff timing, even if the total amount of precipitation stays the same, but just shifts in phase, it's going to have really big effects. So our major findings is that the high flow releases in the rod area have slowed down salmonid growth. We can't separately manage flow and temperature from Lewiston Dam because there's no temperature control device. So we have to sort of balance those two together. Temperatures in the reservoirs are warming, and when they get down to about 750,000 acre feet, that cold water pool can start to become depleted, and that can threaten the spawning adults and eggs. And climate change is going to make that more difficult. Our recommendations are to monitor temperatures upstream of the reservoir to better understand the natural temperature regime of the river and effects within the reservoir dynamics itself. Until there's a temperature control device installed on Trinity Reservoir, if we want to have optimal temperatures for juvenile salmonid growth, we need to start ramping down those spring flow releases earlier. So that's April in dry or critically dry years, or May in normal and wetter years. We think there should be a reduced emphasis on meeting the rod temperature targets for smoltification in late spring, early summer at Wichipec. And instead, we think there should be a balance between providing temperatures for optimal salmonid growth, encouraging timely outmigration, and but still not letting temperatures in the low river get so high that they approach the thermal maximum of salmonids or cause disease risk. We recommend modifications to Trinity Reservoir to allow to put in a multi-level temperature control device so that flow and temperature could be separately managed. And then also recommend either removal of Lewiston or a new conveyance system around the reservoir so that warming could be controlled. We also recommend an end of September storage minimum of 750,000 acre feet, and to develop a multi-year drought contingency plan that studies what happens in Trinity Reservoir when there are multi-year droughts, looks at the storage levels, water temperatures, and the ability to meet downstream release criteria. And then also to come up with specific steps of, hey, it's looking like the river might start getting low this year. What specific steps can be taken assuming that, in any year could be the first year of a multi-year drought, right? So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussions.
Well, first off, I want to say thank you. That was great, and you've given most of my talk for me. No, I mean, really set the stage well for what I'm going to want to talk about later. And I do agree with your recommendations. I do have a question about the removal of Lewiston Dam, though, because with that structure gone, but Trinity Dam still in place, wouldn't we see a lot more chaotic flows downstream when we think about power production and differences between releases for power and releases for the diversion? And isn't Lewiston really just sort of controlling that and then also helping to contribute to that warming?
So that wasn't really an issue that I looked at. And I don't know if any of my co-authors have any more discussions on that, if we want to talk about it later. But I think the idea would be that any modification would not cause the chaos. Like it would be maybe separate controls for the diversion versus the river. I think the routing around the river would be, it depends on the solution. I guess I don't have a great answer, but you bring up, excellent points that would need to be thought through. If I had to prioritize, first priority would be, the temperature control device on Trinity, I think would be a higher priority. Probably more expensive, maybe, but
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Great presentation as always, Eli. As many people know, we've been proposing to change the flow management timing with the same volumes. And I was curious, one of the main concerns is that two things, well, there's many things, but two of them are returning to summer base flow earlier and potential for reducing summer base flow, which isn't part of our current proposal, but people have talked about it.
Yeah.
Increases temperature at the time when spring Chinook are coming in to hold. Could you comment on what your thoughts are on how temperature regime would be affected by returning to summer base flow earlier and, as maybe a separate thing, reducing a summer base flow?
Yeah, I think I think we have enough information now to recommend that earlier return to summer base flow based on the analyses in this report. Reducing summer base flow, I think, is something that is worth looking at. Things you would want to do would be to sort of quantify, okay, under current conditions, how many sort of miles or square meters of holding habitat do you have for adult spring run Chinook? And then if you were to say release it to some lower number, how much area would you have? If you still have, relatively high flows, like maybe if you went back to the 300 CFS, how much of a change would that be? If you get down low enough, then you would start getting potentially thermal stratification in pools. And I think, that's something that's not really understood well enough yet to know. So I think there's, more work that needs to be done before we could say whether or not it's a great idea. It's a good idea to do. I think it's certainly worth investigating. Yeah, thanks. All right, thank you.